Welcome back to Where Are They Now, the series in which we catch up with Carrot Poker School customers and find out how their poker game is treating them after working their way through some of the material. Sorry guys, hang on. Hello, it's Pete. My t-shirt's on inside out. Oh my god, so it is. No, the problem is I've just done the whole video like this. I'm doing the intro afterwards. So the student saw that and yeah. Oh god. Okay, well it's too late now. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Bye. Let's get into it. This is episode 2 of Where Are They Now? Kit joins us today, a long-standing Discord member, seen you around for a while, man. Thank you for joining us on the channel. How's it going today?
Thank you very much for having me. It's all good.
Cool. So please tell me that the moment you got the Carrot Poker School, literally the moment you turned on grade 1, lecture 1, was at this point of the graph. Editor, circle the point where that red line begins to even out for the first time.
Oh, I would so love to tell you that it was, but sadly that it's not. But you will see that there is a second point where we go from losing red line to break even red line. And I can confirm to you that that is the point where I started on CPS.
So it's a decent advert. It's not like the ideal advert, not like the visually compelling way that I'd have liked it to be. But that's great. You know, I'll take that. Editor, circle that point at around 95,000 hands where the red line starts to pick up and even out for the first time. Introduce a sound effect there. So tell us about this first point on the graph then, because it feels like here something changed. It wasn't CPS yet. What caused you to stop having this plummeting, folding all the time, never winning a pot red line?
I did get some coaching at that point. It was from a more GTO oriented player. And I didn't necessarily like that coaching for various reasons. But I think the main thing that he helped was that I started 3-betting more, basically, and that caused the red line to improve. But there was still lots that wasn't right in my game. And so I found my way to CPS eventually.
Cool. And what were the differences between what you've learned at Carrot Corner so far and the way that you were getting that coaching before or studying the game prior to doing CPS?
Well, the previous coaching was a lot of, here's the theory, you should just try to do this. But there was no why. And so I felt that it was very difficult for me to generalize from things that we were doing in study to what was actually happening in game, because the situations weren't the same. But when you understand the why, then it becomes much easier to generalize and apply reasoning. And that's what CPS gave me, which
Yep. Have you had a lot of experience going through the exams, homework tasks, that side of things? Have you mainly just been watching the lectures, and where have you got to in the course?
So with grade 1 and grade 2, I studied the content very extensively. I watched the lectures, but I took notes and did the practice exercises, and I revisited the practice exercises after some time to see if I could recall and review the material. I also invented my own grading system and marked the exams out 100 and got about 75%, which I felt was a very useful sort of self-evaluation tool. With grade 3 and grade E, I've not yet applied that kind of dedicated study methodology to them. So that's on my list of things to do over this summer.
Yep, I think that's the most important thing, is to really get grades 1 and 2 down before you move on to grade 3. I think grade E you can mix in at various points because it's a bit different. It's exploitative in nature, obviously. And I think once you've done grade 1, grade E is fine to do alongside grade 2, actually. And what you don't want to do is become like obsessed with the theory to the point where it's all you can see. But it sounds like you've already learned that lesson and you are thinking exploitatively and you're thinking about true EV and all of that stuff. But yeah, definitely the sort of course that you have to revise a couple of times. You can't just watch a video and think that you know it all. So looks like you're doing absolutely the right thing. All right, we have some spots here that we're going to look at today. Editor, transition to this, please. We're going to start with the 10-9 of diamonds. These are all hands where you faced a river bet or had the chance to call some sort of river action. Could be a raise, could be a bet. And the reason we're doing this is that you said that there's a bit of a disconnect, right, between your in-game thoughts and your out-of-game thoughts. The time pressure, playing multiple tables, these kind of things just make it more difficult for you to solve the spot as well as you'd back yourself to do if you were doing it out of game. And one of the ways that manifests is actually making mistakes on the river when it comes to bluff catching. I'm going to actually introduce a system in a minute that's to do with bluff catching. But first, I want to go over this 10 9 of diamonds hand. We're going to see how we got to the river here. So we open the hijack. We get 3-bet by the big blind. We make the call. Ace 5 3 two-tone comes. We call this c-bet. The turn is an ace, and your opponent, this is a 50 NL hand, I think, goes for a very small, like quarter, fifth pot c-bet size on turn. The river is a 9, where we hit this pair. We face this sizing. Now, if we were doing like a proper bluff catch analysis here, we'd just be deciding between call and fold, and we'll do that in a future hand, right, where call and fold are really the only options. I wonder if there could be a third button available here. Did you consider raising in-game? And
No,
if not, should we consider it now, and why?
I did not consider raising in game, sadly. I think it's really clear that you should consider raising here, because if you think about bet size equals hand strength, it's pretty clear that our opponent is going to have a lot of underpairs to the ace, and those hands are going to be put in a really tough spot if you raise. And it's also very plausible that we can have an ace ourselves, since we might choose to use call only strategies on, at least on the flop.
Yep, so some of the teaching points to do with bluffing that I tell my private students are 1, believability, 2, discomfort inflicting, and 3, does your opponent have a mostly capped range? So I've found that when these 3 things are all true, your line is pretty believable, i.e. there's lots of value hands that you could have. It's not inconsistent with value. It's not the case that you're repping hardly any combos. It's a spot where if you were villain, you would feel really uncomfortable facing that aggression. And thirdly, the range is quite capped that the opponent has overall. You're usually going to do okay with bluffing. So that's a little cheat sheet, a little guide that can help you just sort of distill down some rules to help you access bluffs in spots like this, because it is counterintuitive. When you arrive on this river, you definitely are thinking, well, firstly, I'm getting 5-1, so calling looks like it could be right. It wouldn't take a lot for that to be right. If villain was a recreational player, call might just be the best play, because they may have no idea what kind of sizing to use and just think this is a normal size bet with king jack or something, right? But this looked like a reg when we looked at the stat line here. And I think against a reg at these stakes, you're overwhelmingly going to be seeing kings, queens, jacks, tens in the spot, right? Like, I mean, that's going to be like 80-90% of the range as far as I'm concerned. They could have an ace, yes. They could have nothing. Maybe call is plus EV. Maybe you should exploitatively fold if you don't call, if you think you're never good against this player. But to me, bluff jamming all in here and just kind of ignoring the fact you have a 9 and just sort of breaking through that barrier seems like a really cool play. What would you have? So what would you have to do to find stuff like this, to be more open to stuff like this in the future? Like, what do you think that would look like if you worked on that?
So in the moment, I tried to use the bluff catching system from grade 2 to think about this decision. And I thought, well, the odds are really good. We've got a pair on the board. And, our opponent wouldn't have to be getting too far out of line to make this over bluffed, even though I think regs probably won't over bluff it. But because I was thinking about the bluff catching system, the majority of the time that locks you into call or fold.
Right.
And I know in the lectures there is a small discussion of what hands we should use to bluff raise as well. I can't remember if that's in grade 3 or in the end of grade 2. But just being more alive to the possibility of the third button existing.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Just kind of putting all of the options on the table before you dive in and do a deep analysis of 2 of the options. Just make sure that third one is at least considered. And you might end up just saying, no, that's absurd. I don't want to do that. But it's good to at least put it on the table. Just bear in mind that Carrot Poker School grades 1, 2, and 3 are theoretical grades, right? They're like the nuts and bolts, the laws of physics of the game. And this is such an unbalanced spot by humans that we should be very skeptical of using directly any of the theoretical systems from the course in this spot without thinking about the exploitative stuff. So I would say that it's extremely likely that this spot is either overfolded or underfolded. On the river, it would be very weird if this was just like reacted to in a balanced way. And therefore, let's have a go at estimating that fold equity in real life and hand reading the pool before we lock ourselves into a deep dive into any theoretical system for solving the spot. Happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think after I played the hand, I thought to myself, "Come on, no reg is bluffing here for this size." But I came to the conclusion I should just fold, and I was still didn't see raise as a possibility. Just a quick question. So we're going to ignore the fact that we have the 9 on the board here when we choose to raise. Presumably, though, that means there's a lot of other candidates we would choose to raise here with as well. If we want to be completely unbalanced and exploit this player with their capped range, like we're just going to go pretty mental with a lot of the hands that we get here with that don't have much.
Yep, but villain doesn't see our strategy. They're playing this spot in a vacuum in isolation this one time. There's absolutely no repercussion by taking such a strategy. So any objection as to how much we're over bluffing here is purely like a theoretical construct and doesn't actually have any bearing on our EV. And the real point here is to free ourselves of that construct and say, so what if this means I'm over bluffing? Like, so what if I'm raising all of the combos of 7s, 8s, 9x, diamond, etc.? Do I care that that's what I'm doing? And if you do think the opponent's range is almost exclusively jacks through kings, and you do think the fold equity against those hands is very good, then of course you should raise any hand worse than pocket tens.
Yeah, so I was not thinking about it through the lens of a theory there, but actually I was thinking it's a good thing that I can raise more combos
right
here. Like I can, and being alive to that possibility that I actually can exploit by really, taking diamond, for example, and just being like, I would never bluff this in theory because it doesn't have the right interference theorem properties, but actually because my opponent's range is so capped and so defined here, I can just go for it.
Yeah, I mean, like, if we were going to get into, like, the nitty-gritty of what combos work as a raise and what ones don't, like, 10-9 looks pretty good anyway because it's blocking the rivered 9s full or something like that. And this is a tiny shred of the game tree, but we'd go down that line. And then I think that the main idea here is absolutely right, that, like, once you open the door to the thought process of this is likely overfolded by villain's range here, and I'm going to attack with every hand that's devoid of showdown value against their range because of that, then it almost just becomes a moot point, like what your combos are. It's almost like I'm not even really noticing that I have a 9 in this spot. I'm more just like, their range is 10s through kings. What's my fold equity against 10s through kings? And I'm kind of just mostly playing in this way. Sure, sometimes I'll run into an ace, sometimes I'll run into a bluff, but I think you're right that against the reg specifically, the amount of the time we win by calling down here is like possibly sub 10%, right? So it's probably a fold. It probably goes raise, fold, call in that order. Yep.
And so what do?
We editor countdown from 3. We call. We take the worst line. We're shown. I'm going to go into my psychic mode. I'm going to go with kings. And the reason I'm going to go with kings is it's more likely to 3-bet than any of the other hands pre, and it's more likely to keep value betting and not check than any of the other pocket pairs. My answer is kings. If I get it right, I get some sort of prize from myself from this channel. Let's see.
1812 overture cannons.
He'll do all that. The editor's great that way. He owns lots of cannons, and he usually fires them like for the videos. You know, none of this online effects, like real life cannons. That's how we rock. Yeah. Okay, good. So that's the atypical showdown. The typical showdown. That's going to happen all the time. Let's not be results oriented, guys. It's only one part of the range, but it is mostly hands like that, right? Okay, 7-6 of spades. We go 3-way here. We flop some kind of combo draw type thing. Under the gun, bets half pot, and we call. I think raise is also interesting with this hand and probably fine. Don't want to get lost in that though. We check the turn, villain bets half pot, and we call. We river 2-pair, and we decide to lead. Interesting spot. And we get raised to 19. And we call it off. Okay, so this spot is extremely bizarre. Talk us through this river lead, right? My first instinct when I see river leads these days is, how interesting. And I think a lot of people's first instinct is, oh my god, fish. So there's probably people in the comment section right now that are like so angry about your donk lead that they stopped watching. Because that happened, right? I was told this happened a couple of weeks ago. There's a guy out there who stops watching when he doesn't like your play kit. So just be careful.
Oh,
Okay?
right. Okay. Well, I'm sorry in advance. Okay. So my decision to lead the river here was that I looked at the run out and I thought this is hitting pretty much all of the non-ace combinations that I'm going to be calling, that I'm going to be calling. Uh, and when that happens, I think it becomes quite likely that a lot of hands that are behind are just going to check behind. Whereas you can put them in a tough spot by blocking. So if I had the straight, I would probably block here as well. Um, I think given the position of the opener, it's quite unlikely that he's going to have the five, or he's not going to have a large number of fives in his range, whereas we can have a lot of fives. So then I thought we might be able to get some really cheeky value basically by blocking, and he's got a lot of aces in his range, and blocking such a small size that we might get called,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get raised.
Mm-hmm. So I love the donk bet because I definitely agree this is a spot where villain has mostly a face-up range of ace king, ace queen, ace jack, etc. They will have some stronger hands like a set sometimes, but like I'm not so worried about that. I'm mainly just thinking, how do I play against the bulk of the range here? People give me a hard time every time I say something that sounds like targeting because, you know, notoriously I'm against targeting. But I think when a certain combo is a massive part of someone's range and is a really relevant part of their range in terms of what you should do, it's in some sense okay to target that sort of combo. It's just not okay to pick a combo at random and play against it, right? So I think this will go check check a ton if you check here. I think you will get called if you bet small enough. I think you can actually go bigger here against the fish, right? Remember who your audience is. This is a fish.
Yeah.
I think you can probably lead up to half pot here easily. And I think you have the best hand very, very often, especially after villain's turn sizing, which is mostly inconsistent with like sets and two pair and stuff like that, right? Like on double flush draw, those hands generally go bigger. So again, there's a bit of bet size equals hand strength going on the turn there. So I wouldn't even worry so much about like what your range is and like what you would do with a five and things like that. I don't think those thoughts are really relevant. I think you nailed it when you said this is a situation where if I check, I won't get any more value very often. People are under bluffing this node a massive proportion of the time, and they're probably just checking back most of their turn value range. So I absolutely love the fact that you led this river. I think it's great, and I think more people need to open their mind to this sort of creative play. Good stuff. I can see why you're winning in these games, why you've beaten 25 and L, why you're taking shots at 50. You're thinking creatively. Awesome. You know, you're saying that you struggle in game, but here you're reacting in game to like a really good exploitative pattern and finding the right play. Then we get raised. I don't really. I mean, I'm obviously calling. Like we need 19%. Villain could have been induced to merge or do something silly. I don't really think this is a decision point. I think the decision point is here.
No, we're never folding to such a small size.
Cool. And that's the thing. Sometimes these players, by virtue of the fact that they have these really stupid ranges, they do have ace five off in their range sometimes, and that's fine. You know, it's not your fault that you didn't expect to see that hand. You've not done something wrong. It's just that they've shown up with an anomaly in their range, like a very unlikely guest in their range.
Yeah, I didn't feel too silly at the time.
Yeah, I love this hand. Okay, pocket aces now. Go for a 3-bet. We get called. Don't know if we have a player type read here. I'm just going to quickly have a look at the HUD and see 21, 11 over a small sample, so not much to go on there. We go for... How did I turn our cards off? Testing your memory, guys. Can you remember the suits of our aces? So we go for this small bet here. I think deep here, there's maybe some argument for honestly just like playing big bet. This flop, you can play big or small in theory, and I think it's such a great nut advantage spot and you're a bit deeper that you might even do better just by upsizing the c-bet a bit here. It's something to think about. Nine of spades comes on turn. We decide to check. You're shaking your head. You look disgusted at past kit. What are you saying to him?
Yeah, so these turn barrel spots in general in 3-bet pots have been an area of weakness I've already identified by doing a bit of database study on my stats, and I know that I'm not barreling them enough, and it's probably for value or bluff. But I get my knickers in a twist because I have the emotional fear of being jammed on
Mm,
all the time, and I know that that's a psychological thing, and I need to divorce myself from that. But I know it. I know that it's there, and I know exactly what's happened here. Is I've gone, oh, the nine's a good card from his range, but it also increases the equity of lots of his sort of potentially semi bluff opportunities. If I
mhm.
bet aces here, I'll get jammed and have to fold, and I'll have to be holding to some high equity draws, etc.
Yep.
So I can see exactly how it's happened, but I think we just need to bet here.
Hmm. Yep, I agree. I think like the money we're leaving on the table by not betting double flush draw here, where there's like tons of unblocked hands calling us that are worse, is worse than, you know, the potentially getting jammed on by the combo draw or something. I also think at this SPR, if you're betting like 18 or something, it's not the most appetizing SPR to semi bluff jam, right? It's a bit deeper. Villain's not going to be so happy to just stick it in with like an ace jack of spades hand at this SPR, I don't think. But yeah, let's talk about this mental game leak a little bit because it is an interesting one. There's a worst case scenario that you're kind of trying to prevent from happening, right? Whenever we have these fear based thought processes, we're almost imagining an untenable state of affairs that we think in the moment, or our emotions fool us into thinking we cannot let that come into fruition, that state of affairs. What would be the worst case scenario if you bet this turn? Like, how would you feel if villain did jam on you when you had this hand? I want you to talk through how you'd actually feel there.
I wouldn't actually feel that bad. I think, you know, it's sometimes the fear of the thing occurring is worse than the thing actually occurring and reacting with it. I would be
Hmm.
like, okay, right, we've got aces, we've bet and we got jammed on here. In terms of what I would do, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it probably quite hard.
Yeah.
My initial instinct was to fold, and then I look at double flush draw and I think, oh, maybe I have to call. And I think, oh, I'd prefer to call ace king, but that's also not the correct thought process because I haven't got ace king.
Yeah.
Uh,
So don't worry
and
about this. Don't worry about the technical side of things. But like, what effect would it have on you as a human if you got jammed on here? Like, what difference would it make to your life by tomorrow, for example?
yeah, it's fine.
Would you even remember it?
Probably, yeah. I do remember hands. I do stew on them sometimes.
Okay, so that's another thing to work on, right? Is like maybe let processing them, letting go of them a little bit more.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I think the best way to acknowledge these kind of mental game traps is actually to think, what is the thing that I'm trying to avoid? Instead of being like, ah, that's unlikely to happen, or oh, you know, you still have to bet here. You can use all the logic and reasoning you want, but until you've actually learned to live with the worst case scenario and accepted that that's something that you do have to deal with in poker on a semi-regular basis, and you know you can actually avoid, I think that's much better than trying to explain it away by saying that you have to bet because of X and Y reason. Like, yeah, you have to bet here, but I would do a bit of work on actually like leaning into that fear, observing it, exposure therapy, and asking like, can I imagine that happening? Can I like prepare myself for that and actually be okay with it so that that fear quietens down? Because that fear is noise. We're not trying to speak rationally to that fear. We're trying to show it that it's not needed. And the only way to show it that it's unnecessary is to show yourself that you can live with the very thing it's trying to protect you from, i.e., getting jammed on in this spot. So that's how I would come at it.
I usually try to protect myself emotionally by delving deeper into the technical.
Yep.
And like I'm like, if I can logic and reason my way to why I must do this, then I will be okay with it. Uh,
Yep. Won't
but
work.
but yeah,
It's tempting. It's a band-aid, it's a plaster, it's a comfort blanket, and it's what most poker players do because poker players have had a lot of success usually by using logic and problem solving, coming at life that way. A lot of them have unresolved emotional, a lot of humans have unresolved emotional things going on. And I think that temptation to hide in the realm of logic and almost pretend that you can treat emotional miswiring through logic actually just buries it deeper and makes it harder to ultimately treat. So I definitely recommend just being like, let's lean into that emotion. Let's just go through that. Let's visualize that. The next time you get jammed on, I know this is super counterintuitive, but like Jared Alderman, one of our mental game coaches at Carrot Corner for subscribers, would say, next time you get put in that gross spot where you're jammed on here, I want you to just stew in it and I want you to like pay attention to all of the emotion and everything that's going on and just learn to live with it and learn to be one with it as a human. You know, I think that's just so much more valuable and it will treat it long term. This will not go away through the burying your head in the logical, behind the logical parapet kind of tactic. Anyway, We're going on and on about one turn spot. They're getting fed up. They hate me
Yep.
now. Let's continue. 10 of spades on the river after we check back. Villain checks again. We go for an overbet. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm making up for lost ground here now. That's exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I this gives me nightmares. I remember this hand so well. Yeah, truth be told, I think I'm like, oh God, I knew I should have bet the turn, and now this horrible card has come. But if I bet really big, then I can still be called by a bunch of queens and kings. Hopefully that, um, and it's I don't know. My logic and reasoning just falls apart here.
Right.
I've delved into the abyss.
Right. So because we have unresolved emotional spikes and traumas, and because we're not willing to accept them as just part of our humanity, because we're trying to bury them away with logic every time they arise, we land on the river deeply uncomfortable with the self. We land here kind of like rejecting ourself of this moment. When you're rejecting yourself as valid, you're saying, I'm invalid now, while you have a problem to solve. You don't solve the problem very well, right? There's tons of experiments like this where you tell people, oh, your potential's limited, you're not expected to do well on this test, and you give them a test, you give another group the same test and same IQ, same level of training, and say, you should find this quite easy, and the latter group just does way, way better in all of these studies that I've seen, right? So your whole narrative here puts you in a spot where now the decision of the river is not being made. Technically, you're saying yourself, it's being made based on the history of the hand and the narrative of the hand and the self-image that you're spinning from that narrative. And what we wanted to do in the river here is say, sure, I possibly made a mistake there, but here's a whole new node. Here's a whole new hand almost. It may as well be a different hand. It's a completely different spot. What do you think the best sizing is in the river in the cold light of day when you're not desperately trying to claw back missed turn bits?
I probably want to B75 this. I think
Yeah,
we're in that kind of 80% range, aren't we?
yeah, yeah.
It's not strong enough for an overbet.
Agreed.
And
Like,
we don't want to bet small to in position.
yeah, I mean, sometimes the most important thing in a spot is just your equity. And I do think here that your equity is a bit higher than like what it would be in theory, because I don't think villains trapping as much as they should be in theory. However, they can be trapping here because there's so many nutted combos they could be trapping with that it does make it more likely that you're being trapped, even though the cognitive trap frequency is low. The amount of trap combos are higher, right? There's like Queen Jack of Hearts, there's Spade Spade, there's two pair, there's set. There's just a few of those combos kicking around. So what I do here is just say, well, also if I overbet on such a scary river, what am I doing to the call frequency of like jacks or king jack or something? You're definitely beginning to eat away at it, but on a card like this, you wouldn't be eating away at that so much on like the 5 of diamonds river, where it's a great spot to just go for a huge overbet, right? So underreactive to texture ranges situation because we're lost in the sort of flow of that narrative and that mental game leak and that unresolved emotional reaction on the turn that we're all actually feeling a bit guilty about, I think, at this point in the hand. Okay.
Definitely.
And I think there's just absolutely no question here that this is a fold, right? Like in the cold light of day. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no way this is a fold. The only way I can see it ever an argument for call is the whole, well, if he had something, he'd probably try and get
Right.
value for it on the river, but he could be trapping here,
Right.
as we
So
discuss.
I think you meant there's no way this is a call there when you said there's no way this is a fold, right? I think that's what
Yep,
you.
yeah,
Right.
that's what
Cool.
I meant. Yeah, it's never a call
Yeah.
ever.
So these spots can play tricks on you because you can so easily spin narratives here that make calling seem right, especially if your whole vantage point for this hand is I played my hand badly on the turn. I've not played it the way I was meant to. It looks like I have something different to what I have. You know, reality is now alternate. I'm not in the situation I should be in, so now like everything's wrong and maybe I'm being bluffed, right? So easy to get to that conclusion. But in the cold light of day, I want you to imagine a car park, a parking lot for you Americans out there. Car park is more efficient, by the way, than parking lot. Go away and think about it. Imagine there's 100 people standing in that car park and they are 100 random opponents that play in the 50 NL pool. Now, I want you to imagine that the opponents in that pool, the human beings in that pool, the men and women standing in that parking lot, who have ever jammed over an overbet as a bluff on a texture like this on the river light up green, or at least who have done it in the last couple of months, right? Maybe ever is a bit extreme, but who have done it in the last like 10,000 hands, 20,000 hands. How many humans light up green in your experience?
1, 2.
Right. So if 98 humans out of 100 doesn't have the bluff in their inventory, your maximum equity is 2%.
Yep.
That's a powerful way of thinking about it, right? Because when we say villain could be bluffing, or they would have bet their value hands earlier, or something like that, we're already presupposing that we're looking at one of the people who lit up green, like one of the 3 in 100 or 4 in 100 who are capable of actually ever bluffing this spot. Even if you play high stakes here, most people just don't want to bluff against this sizing. Don't forget, your main value region here is straights, flushes, and sets for this sizing. That's what they'd have to want to attack here. In game, though, editor, count down from 3 and 2, 1. We did call. Oh my god. We ran into the bluffer.
Yeah.
Holy shit. What a good combo to use, though. Probably, right? The ace of spades, king.
Yeah, it's a sick play by my opponent.
The heart, man. 50 NL is... Or 25 NL this is, actually. I just realised. Oh, this villain 23 here at 25 NL is the 1 or 2 in the parking lot that lights up green.
He's got to be gutted. He's got to be gutted. Like, as well that I fished him off. Like...
I mean, maybe we can say that you knew the player and you had a read and this was actually just a great read by you.
No, I don't think so. I smelled a rat. The only thing I can say that in my defense here is that I smelled a rat. Mm-hmm. Like, because it's falling into the trap that you're warning of spinning your own narrative about the hand, mm-hmm. Because I've made this stupid mistake on the turn and then I've tried to fix it on the river. My opponents realize that I've made that dumb mistake and then they're trying to attack me because of that. But that requires so many links in the chain to be true, and only one of them has to fail before you're just looking at 0 bluffs.
Well put. And even if all the links are true, they still need to have the heart and the balls, or whatever you want to say, to pull the trigger at the end of the day, right? So like, even if they do have that thought and they smell a rat in your line, and they notice their blocker, they still have to have the nut flush blocker. They still have to decide to do this. How easily could villain just have called this hand, right? And just been like, well, you know, I have a great bluff catcher and I'm just going to call. Like, it would have been very, very easy for villain to do that. So yeah, as you say, there's too many things that need to be spun in a certain way for this to be right. And it's the kind of call where when you make it, it's so easy to get like this confirmation bias of, I thought X equals Y happened, therefore X was right, and X explained Y. It's so easy.
For what it's worth, I felt like a bloody idiot.
Good.
Like,
that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, villain 23 must be absolutely gutted. Like, they must be sitting here like, that is such an advanced play I just made. I was fully expecting this to work against like straights and sets, and this dude's just snapped me with aces, no spade.
Yeah. Oh god.
Love it. What a hand to end on. Listen, Kit, you've been a great guest. I think that your theory sounds really, really strong. I can tell you've been making good use of the Carrot Poker School. I think you're well along your path to like thinking in true EV and like getting this to all fit together at the tables as well. And most importantly, you're aware of your mental game failings, your technical failings, the areas that you need to work on, and you've got a bright poker future ahead of you, I'm sure. I think you've made some really good choices so far in your poker career with the study you've done, although I would say that, right, if it's CPS, and also just the people you're talking to about hands and stuff. It sounds like you've got some good hand review going on and you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would say it's like one thing on the mental game that talking to people in the Discord has really helped with is to understand that the wheels come off for everyone all the time. Everyone does ridiculous stuff, and like, it's just about reducing the frequency of it's still going to happen. It's always happens. You're going to do something idiotic. You're going to fall into the emotional trap. But if you can reduce the amount of times it happens, then you gain an edge, right? Mm-hmm. And shifting into that mindset rather than beating myself up about every time, you know, every time I get it wrong and just completely lose the plot.
Totally.
being a bit kinder to yourself really, it helps a lot.
And curious, like it's hard to be angry when you're curious. So when you're like, why am I feeling that way on the river? Why am I feeling that way on the turn? And when we lean into that a bit more, it's so much more difficult to be like, you idiot, of course you didn't bet the turn, you so and so. So I think it's just about practicing those good habits in the mental game, and that will make your technical game more accessible and stronger. But yeah, a lot of creativity today, a lot of good stuff, a fun punt or no punt hand to end on. Yeah, what's not to love?
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Pete.
Yeah.
And keep up the work.
You're welcome. If you guys do want to pick up the Carrot Poker School and do what Kit did, just head over to Carrot Corner, click the link in the description after this video. We're going to be back with more Gauntlet soon. We're also going to be back with more. Where are they now? You know what, editor? Let's play the intro as the outro. I just really like it. I'm loving the work you did on that. Let's let it roll. See you later, guys.